Welcome to Let's Fear, where the stories are real and the fear is closer than you think. From haunted places to true terrifying encounters, we take you deep into the unknown. Are you ready to face your fear? I want you to think about the last person who took care of you when you were sick. Maybe it was a parent, maybe a nurse, maybe someone who showed up when no one else did and asked for nothing in return. Now, I want you to ask yourself one question. How do you know they actually wanted you to get better? I didn't ask that question. Not for a long time. And by the time I did, I was stranded on a back road. No signal, no help coming. Sitting next to the person who had been slowly, quietly, patiently trying to make sure I didn't make it. This is my story. And I need you to stay with me. Because the scariest part isn't the moment it broke open. The scariest part is everything that came before it. Everything I missed. Everything I explained away. Everything I chose not to see because I needed so badly for it not to be true. It started the way every nightmare starts. Not with a scream. Not with a threat. With kindness. She came into my life during the hardest stretch I had ever been through. I was sick. I was exhausted. I was the kind of isolated that happens when illness goes on long enough that people stop knowing what to say and start showing up less. You know, that kind of isolated, where you stop blaming them because you understand it yourself. I needed help. Real help. The kind of help you actually need. And she was there. Every single day. Calm. Steady. Reliable in a way that felt almost too good after months of feeling like a burden to everyone around me. She made my meals. She tracked my medications. She drove me to every appointment and sat in waiting rooms for hours without once checking her phone with that look people get when they'd rather be somewhere else. She took notes during my doctor's appointments. She asked questions I hadn't thought to ask. She followed up on referrals I had already forgotten about. Everyone loved her. My family called her a blessing, a genuine blessing, the kind of person you don't deserve but somehow ended up with anyway. My doctors greeted her by name, thanked her for being so thorough, said they wished every patient had someone like her. I called her the one person I could not have survived without. I was wrong about that last part, but not in the way I thought. The first sign, and I need you to understand, I didn't recognize it as a sign until much later, was a feeling, not a fact, not evidence, nothing I could have pointed to, just a feeling that sat in my stomach after certain conversations and quietly refused to leave. She would say something perfectly reasonable, caring even, and something in me would go still in a way that had nothing to do with comfort. Like a room going quiet before a storm that hasn't arrived yet. I told myself I was paranoid. That sick people get paranoid. That isolation does things to your mind, and I was reading darkness into someone who had given me nothing but kindness for months. I told myself I was lucky. That whatever was wrong with me had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with the fact that I'd been sick for too long, and my nervous system had forgotten what safety felt like. So I pushed it down. Every time it surfaced, I pushed it back down. That feeling didn't go anywhere, though. It just learned to wait. The medications changed twice in 4 months. Both times, I got worse before I got better. Significantly worse. The kind of worse that keeps you in bed for days and makes the walls feel like they're breathing. She was the one who managed the doses. She was the one who filled the prescriptions and brought them home and set them out each morning with a glass of water, and that same calm expression she wore for everything. She was the one who sat with me through every difficult night and held my hand and told me this was all part of getting well, that my body was adjusting, that it would pass. I believed her. The doctors believed her. She had notes. She had logs. She had a folder, an actual physical folder, color-coded, with dividers, containing every symptom I had reported, every date, every dosage, every change. organized in a way that made her look like the most dedicated caregiver anyone had ever seen. Later, I found out some of those entries had been changed. Not all of them, just enough. There's a type of harm that works slowly. It doesn't leave marks. It doesn't raise alarms. It doesn't announce itself. It moves at exactly the pace that looks like care from the outside, and it depends entirely on the people closest to you never slowing down long enough to look at the full picture. You don't end up in a hospital emergency room. You end up in a pattern, slightly worse, then slightly better, then slightly worse again. And everyone around you is so focused on managing that pattern that nobody stops to ask one simple question. Who benefits from it never ending? She benefited. I didn't understand how, not completely, not at first. The full picture came later, in pieces, through conversations I wasn't supposed to have and documents I wasn't supposed to find. But the pattern was always there, hiding inside the routine, disguised as dedication. The day it all fell apart started like any other day. A drive, a back road, a dead zone with no signal anywhere on either phone. The kind of stretch of road you don't think about until you need help and realize there is none. The conversation started calmly. It almost always did with her. And then it shifted. The way a road shifts when you realize the lane markings stopped a mile back and you can't pinpoint exactly when. She said something she wasn't supposed to know. One detail, small, specific, about a conversation I had privately, without her, weeks before. A conversation I had never mentioned. A conversation there was no way she could have known about unless she had been somewhere she wasn't supposed to be, or someone had told her something they had no business telling her. I didn't react. Something in me understood, faster than my thoughts could form, that reacting was dangerous, that we were on a back road, that there was no signal, that the wrong response in this moment could change everything. I looked out the window at the tree line and kept my voice completely flat, and I said, "Huh, I don't remember telling you that." She said I must have forgotten. She said I had been forgetting a lot of things lately. She said it gently, softly, the way she said everything, and sitting in that car, on that road, with no signal and no one coming and nowhere to go. I understood, for the first time, fully and completely, and without any doubt left to hide behind, exactly what had been happening to me. The weeks after were the kind that age you, not because of anything dramatic, because of paperwork, because of phone calls, because of sitting across from people and explaining something that sounds impossible to anyone who only ever saw her with the folder and the calm voice and the waiting room patience. Because of watching people's faces go through the same journey mine had, from disbelief to confusion to something quieter and much harder to look at. Because of the moment a doctor looked at my file, really looked at it for the first time without her in the room, and went quiet in a way that told me everything before he said a single word. Because of finding out she had done this before, not to me, before me, to someone else who had needed help and trusted her and ended up in the same pattern. And that case had been closed, filed, forgotten, because nobody had pushed hard enough or long enough or loudly enough to keep it open. People ask me what the scariest part was. They expect me to say the car, the back road, the moment I understood. But that's not it. The scariest part was how long I defended her, how many times I took that feeling, that quiet, persistent, patient feeling, and talked myself out of it. How completely I had been shaped over months to treat my own instincts as the problem, by her, by the situation, by my own desperate need for the help to be real and the kindness to mean what it looked like. The danger wasn't just around me. I had been trained to protect it, and that's the part that doesn't fully leave. Not the back road, not the folder, not even the things I found out after. The part that stays is knowing how good I had become at silencing the one thing that was trying to keep me alive. If someone in your life controls your access to medical care, your medications, your appointments, your records, your information, and something feels wrong, trust that. Not because every caregiver is dangerous. Most people who show up are showing up for real, but because the ones who aren't, they specifically, deliberately, and expertly depend on you not trusting it. That doubt is not a flaw in you. That doubt is the mechanism. It is how it works. That feeling in your stomach exists for a reason. I almost didn't listen to mine in time. I want to tell you something I've told almost nobody, because the people I did tell looked at me the way you look at someone who's either lying or coming apart, and I couldn't afford either of those conclusions. I'm a 34-year-old high school history teacher. I lived in a small town in rural Idaho where I knew the name of the woman who stocked the bread at the Dollar General and could tell you within about 15 minutes what time each of my neighbors got their mail. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that I am not dramatic by nature. I'm the person who waits for an entire stack of evidence before drawing a conclusion. I teach history. I know what happens when people pattern match too fast. So when I tell you it took me 3 weeks to admit something was wrong, I need you to believe me that it wasn't denial. It was rigor. I was trying to be fair. I was not being fair to Dale. His name was Dale Pritchard, 61, retired from the Idaho Department of Lands after 30 years of forest management. The kind of work that means you know what a healthy tree sounds like in the wind versus a sick one. That you've spent enough mornings in the field alone to be genuinely comfortable with silence. He drove a green Ford F-15. Oh, that was probably older than some of his former coworkers. He'd lived in the house to the left of mine since before I moved to Millhaven, and he had, with complete consistency, been one of the steadiest presences in my peripheral life, waving from the porch, dropping off zucchini from his garden in the summer, leaving my trash bins upright if a storm knocked them over. His wife, Margaret, had passed in 2019. I mention this not because it explains anything, it doesn't, but because it's part of who he was, and I don't want to tell this story without making sure he's a person in it, not just a detail. He had a porch light that flickered. 2 blinks, pause. 2 blinks, pause. I'd noticed it the way you notice things that become background, a sound or a rhythm that registers only in its absence. One Tuesday in October, it stopped flickering. Steady on. I noticed. What I want to tell you about the 3 weeks before that is that there were things I filed away as unrelated. The kind of things that individually don't earn a response and collectively don't earn one either, until suddenly they do. A farmer named Gerard posted in the Millhaven community Facebook group that he'd lost 2 goats. No tracks, no blood, no obvious sign of predator entry. It got a handful of sympathetic comments and disappeared from the feed. A woman named Kathy mentioned her dog had stopped going past the back fence. Multiple people had mentioned seeing deer behaving oddly, clustering at unusual times, moving in directions that didn't follow typical grazing patterns. These are the kinds of things rural communities mention without escalating because rural life produces anomalies constantly, and most of them resolve. None of them, at the time, felt connected. What I should have done, what I wish I had done, was call someone sooner. Check on Dale sooner. Be a better neighbor sooner. I keep coming back to that. The Wednesday after the porch light changed, I saw Dale standing on his porch at 8 in the morning, facing the tree line at the eastern edge of his property. I want to be careful here about how I describe this, because I think the way we describe people in distress matters. He wasn't doing anything frightening. He was standing still, facing the woods, not responding to movement elsewhere in his yard. He had a cup in his hand for the first hour, and at some point, he set it on the railing and he kept standing there. What I felt was not fear of him. What I felt was concern for him. I want to make that distinction clearly, because I think it matters for what I should have done next. What I did instead was watch from my kitchen window while I graded papers and told myself he was taking in the morning. He was a man who had spent 30 years outdoors. Maybe he just liked standing in the yard. Maybe I was projecting. By hour 3, I put on my jacket. Dale. He turned, normally, completely normally, and I want to flag that I've since thought about why normal felt like the wrong word in that moment. And I think the honest answer is that I was already looking for something wrong, and that says more about my state of mind than his. "Morning," he said. "Everything okay?" He looked back at the tree line. Told me he'd heard something in the night. Possible coyote activity. I asked if he'd slept. He gave me a partial answer, the kind of answer that's not quite a yes or a no. And then he thanked me for checking and went inside. I went home, and I did not call anyone. That's the part I've spent the most time with since. I found a number for Dennis Farrow through a woman at the diner who'd grown up in the county. He was a retired wildlife biologist, known locally for an expertise in large predator behavior, and for being the kind of person people called when something in the landscape felt wrong. She gave me his number on a napkin, with the quiet authority of someone sharing information that doesn't usually get written down. I want to say something about Dennis before I tell you what he said, because I think context is important. I don't know how much of what he told me was documented science, how much was decades of field observation, and how much was a man who had spent too long alone with a problem that didn't have a clean solution. He was not hysterical. He was not mysterious for the sake of it. He sounded like someone who was tired. I called him from my car, which felt less about secrecy and more about not wanting to be inside my house while I said the things I needed to say out loud. I read from the list I'd compiled. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked me how long Dale had been watching the tree line. I told him what I'd observed. He said, "There's predator activity in that corridor that hasn't been formally documented. It's been moving through the area in a pattern that follows periods of low human activity. Late fall, early winter, between hunting seasons. The behaviors you're describing in the local animals are consistent with what I've documented at the edge of that behavior zone." I asked about Dale. Another long pause. "The porch light thing. The pattern. I've heard of that before. Whether it's an attempt to track something, deter something, or something else, I can't tell you. What I can tell you is that if your neighbor has been observing this activity for weeks, he may need help that's beyond what I can provide." I asked what I should do. "Check on him," he said. "Directly. Don't send a message. Go knock on the door." I knocked on Dale's door the next morning. He answered. He looked like a man who hadn't been sleeping well. Not haunted in some cinematic sense, just tired in the way that goes into the eyes when someone's been carrying something for too long. He let me in. He offered me coffee. We sat at his kitchen table, and I told him, as directly as I could manage, that I was worried about him. Not about what was in the woods, about him. He was quiet for a while. Then he told me he'd been tracking something at the edge of his property for about a month, something that didn't match any predator he could identify from 30 years of fieldwork. He'd been logging its movements, hence the porch light, which was a timing system he'd devised to mark intervals when he heard activity. He hadn't told anyone because he hadn't wanted to alarm people with something he couldn't name yet. "I was going to call the department," he said. I kept thinking I needed one more data point. I told him he had enough. I offered to drive him to the county sheriff's office myself. I told him I was going to follow up regardless, and that he didn't have to do it alone. He went with me. I'm not going to tell you that everything resolved cleanly after that, because it didn't. The investigation into the predator activity is, as far as I know, still ongoing. I've been told it involves at least 2 state wildlife agencies and 1 federal consultation. I can't tell you what they found, both because I'm not fully informed and because some of it isn't mine to tell. What I can tell you is that Dale Pritchard is not in Millhaven anymore. He relocated to stay with family out of state, and from what I understand through mutual acquaintances, he's doing better. Not fine. He was frightened for a long time, and that doesn't dissolve quickly, but better. He deserves that. I sold my house in November. I listed it honestly. I disclosed what I knew about the wildlife activity in the area, gave the buyer contact information for the county wildlife officer, and made sure they understood what they were moving into. They asked a lot of questions. They bought it anyway. I hope they're okay. I genuinely, not dramatically, hope they're okay. I'm telling you this because I think the lesson I keep landing on isn't about what was in the woods. It's about the 3 weeks I spent watching from a window instead of knocking on a door. Rural isolation does something specific to people. It makes us treat observation as a substitute for action. We watch, we catalog, we tell ourselves we're gathering information, and meanwhile, someone nearby is standing on their porch for 4 hours with a timing system they built alone because they didn't think anyone would believe them. Dale believed something was wrong, and he was right. He also needed someone to show up, and I waited too long to be that person. The woods are the woods. What was in them, whatever it was, that's someone else's expertise, and they're working on it. The neighbor is the part I could have gotten right sooner. That's what stays with me. It was a Tuesday, late October, maybe 2 weeks before Halloween, which feels almost too on the nose now, but at the time meant nothing. I had the day off. Not a planned day off. My shift got cut. I had a list of errands I'd been putting off for 3 weeks, and I figured I'd drive out to Lake Harrow and handle one of them. Lake Harrow sits about 40 minutes outside of town. It's not a tourist destination. It's not really anything. There's a boat launch, a gravel parking lot, a concrete restroom block that the county keeps saying they'll renovate, and about a 1/4 mile of walking path that runs along the water line before it just stops. Nobody maintains it well past September. By October, you're usually the only person out there. That was fine with me. I wasn't there for the scenery. My neighbor had asked me to check on his storage unit at the facility just past the lake turnoff. He was out of state dealing with a family situation and needed someone to confirm the lock was still on. That was the whole errand. Drive out, check the lock, drive back. 40 minutes there, 5 minutes at the unit, 40 minutes home. I had chicken defrosting on the counter. I told my sister I'd call her before dinner. I remember thinking, specifically, I want to be back before it gets dark. It gets dark early in October. I pulled into the lake parking lot because the storage facility didn't open until noon on Tuesdays. I'd forgotten that. And I had about 25 minutes to kill. I parked facing the water. I ate the gas station sandwich I'd bought on the way. I was on my phone for most of it. That's the first thing I'd do differently. The lot was empty when I pulled in. I registered that, the way you register something without thinking about it. The absence of other cars as a neutral fact. No boats on the water. Overcast sky. The kind of flat, gray October light that makes everything look slightly faded. I finished eating. I decided to walk the path for a few minutes, mostly to avoid sitting in my car for 20 minutes staring at my phone. I locked the car. I walked toward the water. The path runs left from the boat launch. There's a wooden post at the start of it with a faded trail marker that nobody's repainted in years. I remember looking at it and thinking, the county really had let this place go. I walked maybe 100 yards. That's when I noticed the smell. It's hard to describe, not a decomposition smell. I want to be careful here, because my mind went there immediately, and I think it was wrong. It was more like something old and wet, like the inside of a building that's been closed for years. Organic, heavy, wrong in the way that something is wrong when your body knows before your brain does. I stopped walking. I told myself it was the lake, late season, low water, algae. I'd smelled bad lake water before. This was probably just that. I kept walking. There was a man standing at the far end of the path. He was standing at the point where the path ends, just where the maintained gravel gives out and becomes overgrown grass running down to the waterline. Standing still, facing the water. This is the part where I want to be precise, because I've thought about it a lot. He wasn't doing anything. That was the thing. He wasn't fishing. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't stretching or looking around or any of the things a person does when they're standing somewhere. He was just standing, completely still, facing the water. At a distance, I'd estimate 70, 80 feet. I couldn't make out much. Dark jacket, average height, maybe slightly taller. That's genuinely all I registered, because there was nothing alarming about a person standing at the end of a path facing a lake. That is a completely normal thing a person can do. I felt uneasy. I told myself I felt uneasy because of the smell, and the gray sky, and the empty parking lot, and the general atmosphere of a place that nobody maintains anymore. I told myself I was manufacturing a feeling out of aesthetic conditions. I was not 12 years old. I was not going to turn around and walk back to my car because a stranger was standing by a lake. I walked to a bench about 40 feet from him and sat down. He didn't turn around. I watched the water for a while. I checked my phone. I looked up twice. He hadn't moved, hadn't shifted his weight, hadn't done anything. I left after about 10 minutes when my phone told me the storage facility would be open. I did not look back. The storage facility took 4 minutes. The lock was fine. I noted it on my phone, sent my neighbor a text, got back in my car, and drove home. I called my sister. I cooked dinner. I went to bed. For about a week, I thought about the man at the lake occasionally. The way you think about something slightly unsettling that has no resolution. A story with no ending. A feeling with no cause. I'd rationalized it completely by then. Someone walking. Someone having a quiet moment. Me making it strange because of the weather and the smell and the empty lot. I'd let it go. Then my neighbor came back and asked if I'd seen the footage. The storage facility has security cameras. External ones covering the parking lot, and one mounted on the building facing the road that catches a wide angle of the entrance, including just barely the corner of the lake's public parking area. My neighbor had been reviewing the footage from that week, something to do with a neighbor of his unit who he'd been having a dispute with over access. He wasn't looking for anything related to me. He called me and asked me to come over. He showed me the footage on his laptop. External camera, wide angle, grainy the way all outdoor security cameras are, time-stamped in the corner. You can see my car in the lot. You can see me, a small figure, walking toward the path. You can see another figure already on the path before I get there. Here's what I need you to understand. I walked to a bench roughly 40 feet from a man who was standing at the end of the path. I sat there for approximately 10 minutes. I watched the water. I checked my phone. I left. The footage shows something different. The footage shows me walking to the bench and sitting down. It shows the figure at the end of the path. And then, in the next several seconds, it shows that figure walking. Not toward the water. Not away down the bank. Toward me. By the time I'm sitting on the bench, the figure is no longer at the end of the path. The figure is standing directly behind the bench, directly behind me. For the entire 10 minutes, I sat there. I watched that footage 4 times. I watched it the way you watch something when your brain is refusing to process what your eyes are telling it. I kept expecting to find the frame where I was wrong, where there were 2 people, or the angle was deceiving me, or the figure had moved somewhere else, and what I was seeing behind the bench was a shadow, or a post, or anything. There's no such frame. For the entire duration of my time on that bench, there is a figure standing approximately 3 feet behind me. I never turned around. I had no reason to turn around. I never knew. I've tried to find an explanation. I've spent 8 months trying to find an explanation. The footage quality makes it impossible to identify the figure, impossible to determine what they wanted, impossible to know anything about them beyond their location. Directly behind me, the entire time. The path is linear. There is no way to approach the bench from behind without coming from the tree line. Which isn't a tree line, exactly. It's just where the maintained area ends and the overgrowth starts. Dense enough. Close enough to the bench. I don't go back to Lake Harrow. I won't go back. That's not the part that stays with me. What stays with me is the 10 minutes. The ordinary 10 minutes I spent watching flat gray water and checking my phone, thinking about nothing, thinking the only strange thing was a man standing too still at the end of a path, thinking I was alone. The footage runs for 10 minutes and 22 seconds. He's there for all of it. He's there before I sit down. He's still there when I stand up and walk away. I didn't look back. I never looked back. I think about that every single day. If you've experienced something similar in an isolated area, a lake, a park, anywhere rural and quiet, I'd want to know. Not because I have answers. I don't have answers. I just don't want to be the only one who knows that this happens. I never should have taken that road. That's what I keep telling myself 3 months later, sitting in an apartment in the lower 48 with every light on and a deadbolt I check 4 times before I sleep. I tell myself it was the road, the wrong turn, that if I had just stayed on the main route, none of it would have happened. But that's not really true, is it? Because the note was dated 3 days before I even arrived. Whatever was waiting for me up there, it wasn't waiting for a wrong turn. It was waiting for me specifically. Let me back up. I moved to a small community in rural Alaska in late September. I'm not going to tell you exactly where. Not because I don't trust you. Because I genuinely believe that place should be left alone, unmapped, unvisited, unnamed in any context that might send someone curious up that particular stretch of road. I'll tell you, it was remote the way only Alaska can be remote. Not the romantic kind of remote you see in photography books. Not the majestic silence people drive up from the continental U.S. to photograph. This was functional remoteness. The kind where the nearest hardware store is a 2-hour drive on a road that gets swallowed by weather 4 months out of the year. The kind where your neighbors are not charming eccentrics. They are people who moved somewhere difficult on purpose, for reasons they do not share with newcomers. I had rented a cabin. Single story, wood stove, propane for the kitchen, a generator I ran 2 hours a day to charge my equipment. I was there to work remotely, and if I'm being honest, to disappear for a while. The cabin had been listed online. It looked normal. It had reviews. I checked them. 4.5 stars. The first 2 weeks were fine. I want to be precise about that. Not fine the way people say fine when they mean tolerable. Actually fine. I chopped wood. I learned the rhythm of the generator. I drove into the nearest town twice a week for supplies, took the same route both times, learned which mile markers meant I was getting close to cell service, learned which stretch of road got icy first. I was building a life there, a small temporary one, and it felt solid. The wrong turn happened on a Tuesday in mid-October. I was driving back from a supply run, completely ordinary errand. Nothing remarkable about the day, except that the light was doing what Alaskan autumn light does in the late afternoon, going gold and then going fast. I missed my turn, not dramatically. I just drifted past the marker without registering it, the way you do when you've been driving alone for 90 minutes and your mind has gone somewhere else. I realized after about 4 minutes. I pulled over to turn around. That's when I saw the structure. It was set back from the road maybe 60 feet, behind a line of spruce that had thinned enough in one spot to create an accidental window. It wasn't a cabin. It wasn't a hunting blind, though I'd seen enough of those by then to know the shape. It was a platform, roughly built, elevated maybe 8 feet off the ground on 4 corner posts, with what looked like a tarp or canvas draped across the top. It was facing the road, not parallel to the road, facing it, pointed straight at the direction I would have been coming from if I'd made my correct turn. I sat there for probably 40 seconds. Then I turned around and drove home. I told myself it was a hunting platform. I told myself that for 5 days. I was so committed to that explanation that I almost convinced myself I hadn't really looked at it carefully, that memory was filling in details that weren't there. That whole theory fell apart on a Saturday afternoon when I went to bring in a load of firewood from the stack outside and found the boot prints. They were in the mud on the north side of the cabin, between the wood pile and the wall. Fresh, given the rain the night before. Large, deep-heeled, the kind of print a serious boot makes when someone is standing still rather than walking through. There were 3 of them, close together, like someone had been standing in that exact spot for a while, facing the window. My bedroom window. I want to tell you I handled that with composure. I didn't. I went inside, locked every door, and sat on the floor of the kitchen with my back against the cabinets for about 20 minutes before I could think straight. Then I went through the cabin room by room. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing was missing. No sign of entry. Whatever had been standing outside that window had only been standing, looking. I called the property manager. She was not alarmed in the way I needed her to be alarmed. She said it was probably a hunter checking property lines, that this time of year, people moved through all kinds of terrain, that I should keep my exterior lights on at night. She was calm in a specific way, the calm of someone who either knows more than they're letting on, or has just learned not to get pulled into the fears of newcomers. I couldn't figure out which one. I still can't. I kept the lights on. Nothing happened for 11 days. This is the part I think about most. 11 days of nothing. Long enough that I started to relax. Long enough that the boot prints drifted back into the category of things I could explain away. I started sleeping normally. I stopped scanning the tree line before I stepped outside to the woodpile. 11 days is exactly the right amount of time I now understand. It's not enough to forget completely, but it's enough to drop your guard from emergency level down to background noise. Whatever was out there understood that rhythm, or it was just patient enough not to care. On the 12th day, I found the note. It was under the cabin, tacked to one of the foundation joists. I only found it because I was checking for a propane smell I thought might be coming from a connection near the crawlspace access panel. I was lying on my stomach in frozen mud with a flashlight, sweeping the beam along the underside of the floor, and there it was. A folded piece of paper in a plastic sleeve, the kind you'd use to weatherproof something you meant to stay put for a long time. The note was handwritten. I'm not going to tell you exactly what it said. What I will tell you is that it was dated, and the date was 3 days before I arrived. 3 days before I had driven up that road for the first time. 3 days before anyone except the property manager and I knew I would be coming. I lay in that mud for a long time. The flashlight was still on. Somewhere above me, the wood stove was burning, the heat I had made, the fire I had built, and I was lying in the frozen ground underneath my own floor, reading proof that someone had been there before me. Not a previous tenant. Not a neighbor with a dispute. Someone who had known I was coming and had prepared for it. I did not sleep in the cabin that night. I drove 3 hours and slept in my car at a gas station with the engine running. In the morning, I drove back, because I had left everything I owned in that cabin, and because I kept telling myself I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I walked away from it. I know better now. You don't need to understand something to leave it behind. You really don't. When I finally did leave, for good 2 days later, taking only what fit in the car, I drove past the spot where I'd seen the structure through the trees. I slowed down. The platform was gone. Not collapsed. Not rotted out and fallen over. Gone. Posts pulled, Tarp removed, the ground where it had stood already starting to blend back into the brush, the way ground does when someone has taken their time erasing what was there. It was done watching, or it had moved somewhere else. Late at night, I think about that second option more than I'd like to admit. I have a new address now, a new location, and somewhere out there is a person who showed me very clearly that they could find out where I was going 3 days before I got there. I check under my car before I get in. I check the crawlspace access in any building that has one. I put tape over my bedroom window, not to block what I might see looking out, but because I finally admitted to myself that I had been sleeping in front of a dark window for months without thinking about it. I'm not doing that anymore. The cabin listing is still up, 4.5 stars. I think about that every single day. I want you to understand something before I start. I am not the kind of person this happens to. I'm 43 years old. I've lived in the same zip code my entire adult life. I coach Little League on Saturdays when the weather holds. I drink 1 cup of coffee in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and I have never, not once, missed a deadline at work. I know that sounds like nothing, but I want you to hold on to that because it matters. The building where I work is called the Cathedral. Not officially. Officially, it's the Mercer 5th Professional Complex, which is what it says on the lease and the utility bills and the insurance documents I process every quarter. But everyone in Delwood has called it the Cathedral for as long as anyone can remember, because of the stonework above the entrance, 6 stories, built in 1941. I have worked there for 11 years in facilities management, which means I know every stairwell, every breaker panel, every door that sticks in August humidity. It is not a mysterious place. It is a place where accountants and paralegals eat lunch at their desks and argue about the thermostat. That Tuesday in October, I came in at 6 p.m. for what should have been a 4-hour shift. A water main had failed on the 2nd floor over the weekend. The remediation crew had pulled up the affected carpet, positioned industrial drying fans along the corridor, and logged out by Friday afternoon. My job was routine: walk each floor, verify the equipment was running, record the moisture readings, go home. My wife had texted me around 5 to say dinner would be ready by 10. The pasta with lemon, the one I always ask for. I've thought about that text more times than I can count. The building was empty when I arrived. That was normal. The last tenants cleared out by 5:30, and I had keys to everything. I signed in at the security desk, exchanged a few words with Dominic, the overnight guard, and took the elevator to 2. Dominic had worked the cathedral for 16 years. He had a daughter in middle school. He brought a thermos every shift and refilled it twice from the break room machine, once around 8 and once around midnight. And in 11 years, I had never seen him deviate from that pattern by more than a few minutes. I mention this because later, when I try to explain how I knew something was wrong, Dominic is part of the answer. The 2nd floor readings were normal. I logged them, checked the equipment, and took the stairwell to 3. The fans on the 3rd floor had been set up near the northwest end of the corridor. As I walked toward them, I passed the supply closet. Fluorescent tubes, cleaning products, always locked, pull-cord light switch on my side of the door. The light was on inside it. I stood there and ran through the explanations. Remediation crew, weekend maintenance. Someone had needed something and forgotten. All of those explanations required the light to have been burning, unnoticed, for 72 hours. In a building whose utilities I reviewed every Monday morning. I got on the radio and called down to Dominic. He didn't let me finish. Before I could describe what I was looking at, he said quietly, and without any of his usual steadiness, that I should come downstairs. Just that. Come downstairs. I took the stairs. I don't know why I didn't take the elevator. It was faster and I was already on 3, but I took the stairs, and I moved quickly. And when I came through the stairwell door into the lobby, Dominic was standing behind his desk, not sitting, which in 11 years I had never seen, holding his thermos with both hands and looking at the security monitors on the wall. The monitors cycled through camera feeds every 8 seconds. All 6 floors, standard grid. I knew the layout without looking at the labels. On the feed for the 5th floor, in the corridor outside the East Wing law offices, there was a figure near the far fire door. I want to be precise about what I saw, because I have been asked to describe it many times, and I think precision matters more than drama here. It was a person, or the shape of a person, standing still, not searching the corridor, not moving toward anything, just standing with the particular stillness of someone who knew exactly where they were and had no reason to move yet. The camera resolution was poor. I had submitted a request about that. What I can tell you is that the figure was tall and that it was positioned with its back mostly toward the camera, and that in 40 minutes of footage, Dominic had been watching for 40 minutes before I came down, it had not moved. Dominic told me he had called it in 20 minutes prior and was waiting on a callback. Then he told me the reason he hadn't radioed me sooner. He said he thought I was already up there. The last entry in the official police report reads, "Victim has no memory of the 19 hours in question." I have read that sentence many times. The language of police reports does something to experience. It flattens it, files it, makes it into a data point. I understand why that language exists. I am not angry about it. But I want to say clearly, for anyone listening, that the person described in that report as the victim is a man who coaches Little League and drinks 2 cups of coffee a day and whose wife was waiting at home with dinner. I do not remember leaving the lobby. I do not remember what followed. My next clear memory is a parking lot in full daylight and a police officer crouching down to my level, asking me to confirm my name. 19 hours. I have been told there are no answers yet, that the investigation is ongoing. I have been told to be patient, and I'm trying. What I have not been told, what no one has been able to explain to me, is how a person stands motionless in an empty building for 40 minutes without triggering a single other alarm, without being seen entering, without leaving any trace that the investigators have been willing to share with me. I'm not asking for a ghost story. I'm not interested in that. I'm asking a practical question about a real building in a real town where real people go to work every day. I just want to know how they got in.